If you do not have enough capital to buy a stock that you believe will go up in the short term or the long term, you can buy a call option on that underlying stock by paying a fraction of what you would pay to buy the shares directly. The capital required to buy an option tends to be much lower than the capital required to buy or sell the underlying asset directly, which creates leverage. In other words, buying an option generally requires a much smaller amount and a much smaller investment than buying or selling the underlying asset directly. This allows investors with small accounts or beginners to gain exposure to the markets they are interested in with limited capital. To explain options leverage, we will use an example showing how buying options often allows one to aim at a higher potential return. Let's imagine a trader who in January anticipates a rise in the price of the First Majestic stock, symbol AG, over the next 3 months. To bet on this increase, he can buy shares of the stock. However, since the stock price is currently near $20, buying 200 shares of the stock would cost him about $4,000, a sum he may consider too high. Turning to the options market, our trader notices that the First Majestic call with a strike price of $21 and a delta of 0.54, expiring at the end of April in 3 months, can be bought for $3.15. He decides to buy two calls at $3.15 in the April cycle. In order to do this, he pays a total debit of $630. This is a much smaller amount than the $4,000 required to buy 200 shares of the stock. Let's imagine that by late April, the stock price has risen to $25. Our trader is pleased to see that his calls have increased in value and are now priced at $4. He decides to sell his options to receive a credit of 4 times 2 times 100 equals $800. He thus realizes a profit of 800 minus 630 equals $170. If he had bought 200 shares of stock at $20 a share and sold them at $25, he would have realized a profit of 25 minus 20 times 200 equals $1,000. By buying options, he achieved a return of capital of 170 divided by 630 equals 27%. In contrast, if he had bought the stock, he would have only achieved a return of 1000 divided by 4000 equals 25%. The flip side of the coin is that if the underlying market moves against you, the return on capital can be more negative with an options position. If instead of seeing the stock price rise, our trader sees the stock price drop from $20 in January to $15 by the end of April, what is his loss at the expiration of the calls? The calls expire out of the money and worthless, thus representing a credit of zero. The loss amounts to the entirety of the capital invested and the initial debit paid, that is $630. If the trader had bought 200 shares of the stock at $20 and sold them at $15 a share, he would have realized a loss of 20 minus 15 times 200 equals $1,000. By buying options, he achieved a negative return of minus 170 divided by 170 equals minus 100%. In contrast, If he had bought the stock, he would have achieved a negative return of only minus 1,000 divided by 4,000 equals minus 25%.